I was making my way over to the biology classroom, and I couldn't keep the bounce out of my step. I was hurrying just so I could see Alexander sooner. I really had decided to hell with the consequences, it seemed, although I couldn't entirely understand what was going on between us. Did he really like me, the way Bob had implied, or was that in my head and was he just being nice? It didn't feel that way, though. He seemed just as reluctant to let me go on my way during lunch as I had been to leave. Thinking about lunch made my stomach growl hungrily, though, and I patted it a little guiltily. I wasn't watching where I was going exactly because suddenly I slammed into something solid and I knew it wasn't a wall. Whatever it was had just moved into my path. "Hello there, sweetheart. It's nice seeing you again," said a suave voice, one that sends shivers down my spine. Fort. I stepped back immediately, bringing my books up in front of me protectively. "Get lost." "I don't want anything to do with you." My voice contained so much venom that I was surprised he didn't flinch. Jennifer stood right beside him, one hand on his arm as she smiled evilly at me. "Don't talk to him like that, you little slut." Fort cast her a sideways glance that told me he wanted her to shut up and get away from him. He wasn't interested in her. It was me he had his eyes set on. He stepped in closer just to prove it, backing me into a wall. "We had fun, didn't we? Let's hook up again tonight?" He said, one hand reaching out to touch me. I slapped it away as hard as I could, and he hissed angrily. Jennifer seemed not to have heard his last words because she pushed in beside me and said, "You're such an idiot. You can't even satisfy one man." "Good thing I was around, isn't that right, baby?" She ran her hands up his arm and pressed herself against him a little now. Fort responded a little distracted, his eyes still focused tightly on me, although he was running them up and down my body. "Those clothes don't suit you at all," he said. Jennifer nodded in agreement, but I knew Fort meant he wanted me to wear something more revealing, whereas Jennifer just thought any clothes I wore looked ugly on me. "Come on, hun, we're going to be late for class if we don't leave now," Jennifer cooed. Fort was nodding and smiled at my stepsister. "Let's ditch class. Go, I'll meet you at your car." He wiggled his eyes suggestively at her. She squealed and immediately started walking, leaving me more or less alone with Fort. She was so stupid. He turned to me again as soon as she was out of sight and prevented me from sneaking away. "You can run, but you can't hide Brittany," he said, his voice low as he backed me into the wall again. Something in his eyes looked a lot like a caged animal. It was trying to claw. "It's way out. You're gonna be mine soon enough." His hand came up to wrap around my throat, rubbing the bare skin there roughly. I swallowed nervously, readying my leg to kick him again. Panic was surging through me as I remembered Friday evening, immobilizing me. Fort was suddenly pulled away from me and a low and angry voice said, "What do you think you're doing?" The voice sounded so angry, in fact, that it was nearly a growl. The impact it had on Fort was very satisfying. He whirled around, his shoulders slumped, and he shook his head. "Nothing, Mr. Clitton. I'm going to class now." His voice was very demure, but as he all but ran away, he cast one look over his shoulder, hate-filled. Alexander didn't seem to be impressed in the least as he watched the guy leave, his shoulders shaking with suppressed rage. Then he turned around to look at me. "Are you all right, Brittany?" I nodded, but at the use of my full name, I realized the hallway was anything but deserted. Students, mostly from the biology class, were all staring. I shivered and nodded. "Yes, Mr. Clitton, thank you." We all filed into the classroom and I hurried to the back, glad that I could sit down because my legs felt a little wobbly. So I had been mistaken. Just a hug, albeit a long one, wasn't enough to make me strong enough to face anything for the rest of the day. It was of course silly of me to forget that he attended school here as well and that I didn't have the chance to run into him. But I really had forgotten with all the worrying about Dennis and the fact that my father had been home this weekend. Alexander started class, handing out assignments. His voice sounded normal to anyone but the most observant. To me, he still sounded angry, but when I met his stormy eyes, I felt a wave of love and concern wash over me. I nodded slowly, breathing in deeply to show him I was fine. During the entire lesson, he kept walking around the room from person to person as he explained and helped people. Every time he was near me, he'd brush his fingers across exposed skin on my arm and twice even across the back of my neck. It helped to keep my mind of things, well, bad things at least. By the end of class, I was thinking mostly about him again, and that tension was back, differently. It wasn't as heavily there as that morning, but it still made my skin tingle. When Alexander at last dismissed the class, he reminded me loudly that I did have a detention again. I hadn't moved anyway, but I guessed he said it for the benefit of the other students, so that they knew I had a legit reason to stay behind. When the last one was out the door, he held up a hand. Stay here, I'll be right back, okay? He was out the door before I could reply. With a shrug, I pulled out my homework and started on that, only a little disappointed that he hadn't come over to hold me again. I was really confused now. I knew I wanted to be with him. The way he made me feel said enough, despite what I had been thinking before I'd found myself falling harder for him every time I saw him. But it just wasn't clear to me what he felt and wanted from me. Did he feel like I did? Did he really think being with me was worth risking losing his job? Or was he still just being nice because I was friends with his sister? A package was dropped in front of me. Here, you must be hungry. You missed lunch because of me. I looked up to find Alexander standing in front of me, leaning forward on my desk to peer into my face. He was smiling and nodded encouragingly at the food in front of me. It was just a simple sandwich and a bottle of orange juice. I dug in hungrily. It tasted absolutely amazing and was nearly done when I realized he had missed lunch too. Oh, I blushed madly at him and he grinned. I already ate a gramochoye. I finished the last bit hurriedly and took a few sips of the drink before bending back over my homework. I had just stuffed myself like a pig in front of him. How embarrassing. As if he read my mind, though he said, I should not have kept you from your lunch. You were very hungry. I forget sometimes. You need more food than I do. He sounded genuinely remorseful, as if he had done something horrible. He had moved back a little to sit down on the edge of the desk in front of mine, and as I looked up, his stormy gray eyes were focused intently on my face. Tell me about yourself, he demanded then. What? I stuttered out, surprised by the request. I want to get to know you. Will you tell me about yourself? He asked gently. A soft smile was curving his lips, and I wanted nothing more than to kiss them. Blushing again, I shrugged. What do you want to know? Everything, he replied. The look in his eyes told me he was deadly serious. He really wanted to know everything about me. Well, I have a little brother that I absolutely love to death, I told him honestly. Thinking about Andy made me a little sad again, and I could tell he noticed because he hurried to say, Is he well? I nodded, and then I did something I didn't expect at all. The urge to tell him everything was just too strong. The words rolled from my lips on their own accord. He's as well as can be. He misses Mom a lot in our old home. Nothing is the same anymore now that we live with my dad. Stephanie, our stepmother, has no time for him whatsoever, and the nanny is really firm with him. He has so much trouble adjusting. He's really shy around strangers, you know. He doesn't make friends easily. He's always worrying about me too because Jennifer always gets me in trouble. This morning he was crying, and not even reminding him about our dreams could cheer him up. I took a deep breath and realized that tears had formed in my eyes, forcing their way out. Alexander was already on my side of the desk, pulling me swiftly into his embrace. He didn't say anything as he held me. After a while, he pushed me back a little to look at my face. What would you wish to happen? To make him happy? Can you go back to your mother? I shook my head. Our mom's dead. She got really sick one day, pneumonia. Alexander changed his hold on me so that one arm was tightly wrapped around my waist while the other softly stroked my hair. His eyes were filled with compassion, but he didn't say anything like the hated words, I'm sorry. Instead, he said, Then, what would you like to happen? I guess you would like to leave your father's home? Meeting his eyes, I nodded. Yes. He doesn't like either of us anyway. No one seems to like us. I wish I could just take Andy with me and raise him myself. He deserves a good home where he feels safe and loved. And so do you, Britt, Alexander added. I heard a scraping sound, and then suddenly Alexander was sitting down, pulling me with him into his lap. Now, let's talk about lighter things, shall we? He murmured into my hair. It felt so amazing how I fit right in there, with my head tucked underneath his chin and his arms around me. The hard planes of his chest felt soft and warm as I leaned into him. The rest of the hour flew by as Alexander asked me question after question about my likes and dislikes, but he didn't mind when I started asking him my own questions. Sometimes it felt like I already knew the answer to a question before he replied. I had just known, for example, that his favorite color was topaz before he even said so, although it still made me blush when he explained that was because it was the color of my eyes. He was such a charmer. At exactly 5 p.m., he unfurled his arms and helped me get up. He gracefully flowed to his feet and smiled. Seems like it's time to go home. I nodded and frowned at myself for feeling so sad about that fact. I would get to see him again tomorrow. Besides, I really needed to spend time with Andy and cheer him up. I had to show him I wasn't going to give up. Alexander followed me out of school, a comfortable silence stretching around us. The school was deserted, and so was the parking lot. Obviously, everyone already left. No wonder he hadn't been worried about anyone walking in on us. I stared a little morosely at the empty parking lot, knowing Jennifer had left without me and that I'd have to walk home. Dennis had, after all, quit his job, so I couldn't expect him to come and pick me up. Alexander followed my look and smirked suddenly. "Seems like I get to take you home, a gros McCroy." He took hold of my hand and tugged me towards his flashy red car. I couldn't help but feel a little happy about that. It meant more time together with him. The car ride was quiet, and I found myself thinking about us's again. Did he really feel the same about me as I did about him? The way he acted really showed that he didn't care. He could lose his job if it was found out. "Alexander?" I asked, determined suddenly to find out where we were standing at. I didn't want to go home and worry about it all night. "Yes, agua quoi?" he replied, raising an eyebrow to show me he wanted to know what was on my mind. "What, eh? Where? What's going on between us?" I cringed when I said us. Because it implied there was an us and I didn't know that. It was what I was trying to find out. Alexander stared at me for a moment and then said seriously, "I'm sorry, Gras Mocroy. I'd been going about this all backwards." I felt my heart sink to the pit of my stomach. See? There was no us. He was just being a good friend, like his siblings. But what about that kiss then? Blushing and feeling hurt and upset, even though it wasn't his fault, but my own stupid mind that had fooled myself. I turned away to look out the window, hoping the rest of the ride wouldn't be awkward now that I had ruined things. "Britt," he took one hand of the wheel and gently folded it around mine. "I want to be with you," he said. My eyes automatically shot to his face, thinking that I must have heard him wrong or that he was joking. There was just no way this insanely handsome man, at least 5 years older than me, would want to be with me. "I want to be with you, Brittany," he repeated, smiling softly at the disbelief on my face. "Would you go out with me on a date? Wednesday, perhaps?" A little numb, I nodded my head. "Yes." My voice sounded breathless, and I mentally scolded myself for sounding like such a dumb, love-struck ninny all of a sudden. He suddenly brought my hand up and pressed a kiss on the top, like an old-fashioned gentleman. His lips were soft, and I could only just suppress a shiver of delight. "We have arrived at Gramokroy," he said, letting go of my hand. I wrenched my eyes away from him to see that he'd parked his car right in front of the big empty house. I took a deep breath, savoring his scent before opening the door. "Be strong, but call me if you need anything at all," he said, and I nodded. Squaring my shoulders, I marched up to the front door. I had to knock because my keys were still in that bag at the Clitton residence. The maid opened and she smiled at me. That was a good sign, probably. Turning, I watched Alexander drive away, ignoring the strange pulling feeling on my heart. Stephanie was apparently gone, out with friends according to the maid, but the rolling of her eyes told me she didn't believe that. Jennifer was out too, on a date with some guy probably, or maybe hanging out with her new besties. Since my father had left this morning again for work, it meant I had the house pretty much to myself with Andy. Good, time to do some major cheering up then. Just done in. When you all in makers. Hi, when you ate that is a makers. I when you ever real pie. I when you ever real buy. I when you ever real buy. I when you immediately seemed to help, if only a little. I wondered how Bob had known that fact. He hadn't met his soulmate yet. Although Bob never talked much about those first 10 years he'd been a vampire, neither Sarah or I had been there by his side then. When I got home, Sarah and Dennis had finally decided to be social, it seemed. Or maybe they were simply downstairs because Dennis's body was definitely human and he needed sustenance. Evening, Mr. Clitton," the guy said hesitantly, and I growled in annoyance. "So now you suddenly remember your manners, do you?" I said. I could still vividly remember that afternoon when he'd openly defied me, touching M.Y. Britt while staring me down. Pity. Sarah had already been in the car and hadn't seen him at that time. Dennis visibly shrunk into himself, but he bravely said, "I'm sorry, I did not mean to offend you in any way, and I will do anything to get your approval." Sarah is the most amazing girl I've ever laid eyes on. Sarah, who was sitting beside him, smiled widely at his words and then returned to glaring at me. I shook my head a little confused and then laughed as realization dawned on me. "I'm fine with you and Sarah being together. You're soulmates. I know you would never do anything to harm her." Relief flashed across the young witch's features. Despite his brave words, it was obvious he didn't want to fight me. He knew he'd lose. His magic wasn't enough to do serious damage to me, and the spells that could took too long to be useful in an open fight. I'm referring to that day in the parking lot. "Dennis, when you defied me and touched M.Y. mate," I explained, but I didn't feel angry about that anymore. I was just grumpy because I was still yearning so strongly to go to Brit. It was hard focusing on anything other than the link between her mind and mine. After today, it seemed to have gotten much stronger again. I suspected strong enough even for Brit to realize the connection was there. "Dennis, Sam," Sarah exclaimed, slapping his shoulder playfully. "You flirted with Brittany?" The blonde-haired witch looked a lot like a little angel, a cherub. Although his body was all hard planes and angles, showing clearly that he was a man and not a boy, he shook his blonde curls from his eyes and said, "Brittany needed a friend. That family of hers is horrible. They're all so mean to her, she gets the blame of everything." I nodded. "Sarah, that stepsister doesn't want to be seen with her. She makes her walk to and from school if she's even a second too late. I want you to pick her up tomorrow morning. As her friend, it's not weird if you do that, right?" I left the unspoken words hanging. I would be glad to do it, but as her teacher people, we're bound to notice, and we didn't want that. I knew I'd told Britt several times that I didn't care about the job, but I did want to keep it if that was possible. I preferred being able to see her in school and keep an eye on her there. Not just Fort seemed interested in her. Nearly all the supernatural students at the school paid extra attention to her. I wasn't very strongly telepathic, not like Sarah, but I had still picked up quite a lot of thoughts that I didn't want to hear. The boys at school, mostly the wolves, had no clue how close they'd come each day to me ripping their throats out. Everyone knew that I did not share, but as long as Britt wasn't marked as mine, they didn't know I had claimed her. I sighed. Maybe I should let the entire supernatural community know. Calling a meeting might not be a bad idea. No, I don't think that would help Alex, and of course I'll drive her to school from now on. Now that Dennis isn't doing it anymore, that's a great idea. Sarah was reading my mind, of course. Why? A meeting to tell everyone she's mine would at least keep the kids at school in check. Fort was bothering her again in the hallway today, which reminds me, I need to call Thomas and tell him he's gone soft. He promised me this would stop. Dennis shivered, obviously not used to the easy way I talked about the supernatural community. I was, if not their leader, I let the elders run the town, definitely able to demand pretty much everything I wanted. Thomas is out of town on business? Alexander, that's probably why Fort is running wild like that. He thinks he can get away with things when the alpha's not around. Bloody Kid is bullying a lot of the young witches as well. He calls us inferior. At the last words, Dennis spat angrily and then buried himself in the plate of mac and cheese, embarrassed by his outburst. I see. So he hasn't been punished yet. I nodded. That made sense. Although it pissed me off that Thomas had refrained from telling me he was away when I was on the phone with him. "I can tell Britt is nearly ready to accept you, Alex. She said yes when you asked her on a date, didn't she?" "That's why you should wait with a meeting. She's smart and sensitive. She would notice if half the student body started treating her differently all of a sudden. Besides, I think she'd appreciate it if you introduced her properly instead of going behind her back. She's stubborn, you know. She'd be pissed if you did that." Sarah shared some of her insights, and I couldn't disagree. Britt was stubborn, all right. It's what had kept her upright these past 3 years since she started living with her dad. It's why she was still alive and kicking even though she had to care for her little brother and love him like a mother and father. I really wished I could just take the both of them away from that house. They could live here without a problem. Enough space and money. No lack of people to love the both of them either. With a smirk towards Sarah, I thought Sarah would just love to have a little brother to look after. Showing me she'd heard the thought, Sarah started to smile. "It might not be a bad idea to look into the legal aspect of that, Alex. So that when the time is right, we can pluck them both away. I doubt she'll move in if she can't take her brother with her." Dennis groaned. "You know how confusing it is to hear only one half of a conversation? I'm no mind reader like you, Miz. But you're right. Brittany would never leave that house without Andy." We talked a while longer, planning what to do with Fort and with Brittany and Andy. We needed a plan. After a while, Sarah started on the topic of the date and started planning that, leaving me with little input and nothing to do. When at long last we all got up to go to bed, it was nearly midnight. There was just one question remaining. "Dennis, when are you moving in completely? Or are you moving out, Sarah?" Would not be so bad if she moved out, meant I wouldn't have to hear them have sex. Sarah, having heard the thought, laughed, but Dennis replied, "Hey, you are okay with me moving in?" "Of course. Why wouldn't I be? If your grandmother is okay with it, then so am I." His grandmother was the crone of the village. It sounded disrespectful to me to call a pleasant old lady crone, but for witches that was a title of honor. It meant she was the leader. "My grandmother is very happy for me. She can't wait to meet you, Sarah," Dennis said, turning himself toward Sarah to explain what his grandmother had said and done. I left them and wished Bob good night as I passed him watching TV. it appeared to be some kind of show about vampires. He found those greatly amusing. They were so unrealistic that it was funny. When I crashed in bed, I touched my mind gently to Britt. She was sleeping already. Her dreams were restless, though, filled with worries about her baby brother and, surprisingly, about me abandoning her. I filled her mind with comforting thoughts about how I loved her and would always protect her. It wasn't hard to paint a picture in her dreams where both she and Andy lived in my house with Bob, Sarah, Danis, and me. She accepted the image as her own. It was close to what she wanted herself. After that, I turned around and fell asleep myself, hoping that tomorrow would bring me another step closer to winning her heart. Hey, I'm back from Norway and ready to continue this story. Happy New Year, everyone! Vote and comment, please. I would really like some feedback. Tuesday seemed uneventful compared to Monday, right until the very end, but I liked it that way. Sarah picked me up and drove me to school in the morning, much to Jennifer's chagrin, but she couldn't say anything about it. During third period, I smiled at Alexander the moment I saw him, and as he passed out sheets with information, he brushed my hand. It took the edge of the burning need to go to him and kiss him senseless to hell with the fact that everyone could see us. Jennifer was extremely forward in her way of flirting this class, tugging her shirt lower and her skirt up to reveal more leg. I wondered if guys really thought that was attractive. To me, it just seemed cheap. It was amusing to watch, though, even if it was a little disgusting occasionally. But I knew Alexander wasn't interested in her at all. After all, it was me he'd asked out on a date. I did not get a detention that day, and I was almost sad about it. It meant I wouldn't be spending another hour with Alexander and that he wouldn't be the one to take me home. On the other hand, Sarah invited herself over, so today would still be fun. I was the last to leave when the final bell rang, being extremely slow about packing my bag so it wouldn't seem suspicious to the other students. When I was finally done, I looked up to see that Alexander was standing right in front of the door. He cast me one look, questioningly, with one of those eyebrows raised. I slowly made my way over to him, and feeling brave, I reached past him and pulled the door shut. He was chuckling, and I felt my face heating up, but at least he took my bag from me, dropping it to the floor with a heavy thud. Then, without saying a word, he pulled me into his arms, tucking my head under his chin. I shivered, again experiencing that sensation of an elastic band that had been under constant strain finally relaxing. Melting into him, I wrapped my arms around him tightly, ignoring the dirty thoughts that came unbidden. He was running gentle fingers up and down my back in patterns, his breath flitting down my heated cheeks to tickle the sensitive skin just underneath my ears. I wondered what it would feel like if he kissed me there. A groan escaped his lips and he muttered, "You're going to be the death of me, a quarry?" I felt more, then heard the sensual promise in his voice as he pressed me up against the door. I heard the key turn as he locked it, my heart thudding loudly in my chest and my skin on fire, all of it seeming to run in a direct line to the center of my body. One of his hands was on my hip, the lower half of his body pressing into me. The other hand slid up my arm, across the soft skin of my throat, and then pulled my chin up so he could look me in the eye. His normally stormy eyes were so dark they were nearly black, the air around us practically shimmering with the repressed sexual tension. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against mine. He was breathing fast, and I realized that I was too. My own hands were splayed out across his chest, only barely keeping my breasts from touching the hard planes of muscle. I sighed, my breath flitting across his lips, and that's exactly when I felt something snap inside of me. I wanted him, more than anything, and I just knew it was right. The rules were wrong. They couldn't keep us apart. It didn't matter. The connection between us was so clear that I could almost hear his thoughts. He was practically screaming in his mind, "Mine! She's mine! I love her! Kiss her! Kiss me, Britt!" The sentences all short and jumbled, as if the circuits inside were overheated and he wasn't thinking rational anymore. I didn't care because I felt the same. I closed the distance between our lips. Electric sparked and fire burned. I felt like floating as his lips molded against mine. He moaned as I reached a hand up to tug on his hair, pulling him closer, if that was even possible. I felt a very strong sense of satisfaction at being the one that had made him moan. Good, it was an amazing sound. It made things tighten low in my body. He was running one hand through my hair, the other one slid down to cut my bottom, lifting me effortlessly off the floor. I wrapped my legs around his waist, letting out my own moan at the feel of him hard and hot against me. I realized my fingers were trying to undo the buttons on his shirt, and that's when I stopped. Wow. I was trying to undress Alexander. I was trying to undress my teacher. His lips came away from mine, but he didn't seem to notice I wasn't kissing him back anymore. He attached his mouth to my throat, and as if he'd heard my earlier thought, kissed right to that sensitive spot just below my ear. Another moan escaped my throat, and my back arched as a hot wave of pleasure washed over me. Our lower regions connecting, creating a short moment of friction, it brought on another moan that I just couldn't hold in. I felt heat rush to my cheeks, suddenly feeling embarrassed, and that did stop him. He didn't let go, didn't even alter his position in the least, one warm hand possessive on my butt. The evidence of his obvious arousal pressed against the V between my legs, his forehead resting against mine. We were both panting. No, don't be embarrassed. His voice was husky, filled with lust that was nowhere near satisfied, but his eyes had turned to a lighter shade again. He pressed himself closer, and that caused another wave of pleasure to shoot through my body. He was rubbing against me in such a way. I knew he'd seen it on my face because he did it a second time, and then smirked in male satisfaction at the moan rolling off my lips. I very much love that sound, he whispered hotly, pressing against me again just to hear me moan. Alexander. His name fell from my lips, and I was shocked to hear how unsteady my own voice sounded. I sounded like sex, I thought, and that made me blush again. I love it when you say my name like that, Alexander said, again that male satisfaction filling his voice. He ran one hand up my side and then pulled away, allowing me to drop my unsteady legs to the floor. Sarah is waiting, he said with a roll of his eyes, reaching behind me. He unlocked the door, freeing me to go home and leave him. I was still leaning against the door, not trusting myself to stand up fully after that onslaught on my senses. I was still reeling from his hot kiss, and there was something hot pooled low in my body that craved release. I knew what kind, and I shivered, dirty thoughts after a very dirty moment. Just looking at Alexander, I could still see how aroused he was, but he seemed collected as he stepped away from me to lean against his desk. Bloody man, I was going to be the death of him? How about the other way around? He was smirking as if he'd heard that, and I surprised myself by half growling, "No reading my mind!" Amusement sparkled in his eyes, and he nodded. "Fine, I won't do it again, but only if I get to kiss you like this more often. Deal?" Was he mocking me now? Yet I nodded. Deal. It felt like I'd just done something irreversible. There was no going back now. I had officially broken the rules now by making out with my teacher. I felt relieved somehow. "Britt, you should go now." "Sarah is waiting and she's starting to get impatient," Alexander said. His voice was still husky, but it contained much of his amusement too. I frowned. "How do you know?" "I can read minds, remember?" he said, chuckling as if he'd said something very funny. "Are you making fun of me now?" I couldn't keep a little of the hurt out of my voice. How could he? After we just kissed. It was more than that, way more, but I couldn't quite make myself think about it. He smiled. "Of course not, Aguamoshua. I would never make fun of you." It was a joke. I felt a soft touch on my mind, a caress. It was filled with warmth and love and acceptance. I just couldn't feel upset anymore. "All right, I'll see you tomorrow, Alexander," I offered as I picked up my bag from the floor where he dropped it. Just before I opened the door and left, I felt his body heat right behind me, a soft touch of his fingertips underneath my chin. He tilted my head up to meet his eyes. "Take care, Brittany." He brushed his lips against mine softly, barely touching, and then he stepped back again. As I walked through the empty hallways, my hand strayed to my lips. They felt hot and a little bruised. It felt absolutely delicious. Sarah was indeed fidgeting impatiently as she stood, leaned against her own shiny silver car. "Finally! You took your own sweet time saying goodbye," but she sounded more amused now than angry at having to wait. I'd blushed at her and hurried to get into the car, hoping she wouldn't notice. "So," Sarah chirped, "are you two an item now?" I stared at my friend for a moment, then hurried to look at the window as we peeled away from the parking lot. I could just see Alexander leaving the building and walking to his own car. He was smiling and waved once in my direction. "Well, are you?" Sarah insisted when I didn't reply. "I don't know. We just kissed," I told her, blushing furiously. I hid my face by looking out the window intently, even though I could no longer see Alexander. "I find that hard to believe. You have a hickey on your neck, Brittany. That doesn't happen if you just kiss." She was shaking with repressed laughter for some reason. Mortified, I clasped my hand over the spot below my ear. That bastard! Why did he do that? How was I supposed to hide that from Jennifer and Stephanie? "He very much wants to make you his. My brother is very possessive when it comes to girlfriends," Sarah said as if reading my mind. although it was probably clearly written on my face. Girlfriend? I asked, or more like squeaked. Was I his girlfriend now? Yeah, he doesn't date much, you know. But when he does, he really cares about you, honey, Sarah explained. And don't worry, I can cover up that mark. No problem, no one at your home will notice. She winked at me. God, that girl really could read minds or something, just like her brother, at least of the three of them. Bob seemed somewhat normal. Sarah snorted inelegantly but said nothing. When we arrived at my house, she pulled out a bag of makeup from under the driver's seat. Adeptly, she dusted something on my neck with cool, certain fingers. She clicked a few times with her tongue, but pretty soon she said, "All done, no one will notice." At least I didn't have to wonder about why he seemed so bloody satisfied. He marked me for the whole world to see. At least it would fade in a few days. I'd just have to wear a high collar tomorrow. Oh, before we forget, I got your overnight bag with you. The one you forgot on Saturday. Sarah tugged it out from behind her seat and deposited it in my lap. Great, my keys were in there. I thanked her as I led her to the front door. As I ushered her inside the big house, I drew in a relieved breath when I noticed that again, neither Stephanie or Jennifer were there. Come on, let me introduce you to Andy. The day seemed to fly by, and surprisingly, Andy seemed not the least bit shy around Sarah. Of course I understood that a little. Sarah had that way of making you feel comfortable. She always seemed to know exactly what to say to ease your mind. I kept thinking about Alexander. It was impossible not to, really, the memory of his hands on my skin or his lips. Every time I thought about that, I would start tingling and I couldn't refrain from reaching up to touch that hickey. It really was a good thing Sarah knew how to cover it up. If Stephanie or Jennifer found out, they'd probably give me hell about it. I was just a little pissed at Alexander for doing that. I didn't mind the mark. In fact, I found it rather exciting that he'd wanted to mark me his apparently. But did he have to do it in such a visible spot? I could already hear him argue that it wasn't a proper mark if nobody could see it. After all, it was meant to show the world I was taken. Was I really taken, though? Was I his girlfriend now? We hadn't even gone out on a proper date. All this marking me his stuff was rather weird anyway. We were supposed to keep this secret. He would lose his job if the school knew we were dating. Sarah did a good job cheering Andy up even more. She invited him over to her house to come play with the video games Bob had. She assured us both that Bob would love to show them to him. I wasn't too sure about that, but hey, it was her neck, not mine. Of course it meant Andy wanted to go over to the Clitton house first thing tomorrow, which wasn't possible. But Sarah promised him he was welcome anytime. She was even going to make a room for him so he could sleep over if he wanted. I thought that was a little too much, but Sarah cast me a look that said, "Don't disagree with me, I'm saying this for a reason." I was dying to ask her what the hell she thought she was doing, but didn't get the chance till after dinner. Stephanie was surprisingly nice to Sarah. Jennifer wasn't there though, she was out on another date. It was nearly 10 p.m., and at long last, we'd managed to get Andy to go to sleep. He was so hyper about making a friend, even though she was 10 years older, that he didn't want to go to sleep until she'd left. He refused, even though we'd read him 2 bedtime stories together, so at long last, I offered to sing him a lullaby. He wanted Sarah to do that, but she'd laugh saying, "Sorry kid, I can't sing for the life of me. But I'm sure Brittany is really good. Let's both lie down and listen, Kay?" And then Sarah had gracefully lain down beside my baby brother and pretended to fall asleep. Satisfied, Andy had then curled up into my side, demanding I sing that lullaby. I didn't know that many, and I had to think deep and hard. Surprisingly, the song I sang for him was the same one Alexander had sang for me. I didn't know I remembered it that well, but as I started humming the melody, the words found their way to my lips, and soon I was singing. I knew that Sarah had twitched in surprise and then stared at me with open mouth, but I'd chosen to ignore it. Andy was out like a light in 1 minute flat. That had to be a record. Back in my own room, I beat Sarah to it by springing my own question on her before she could ask me about the lullaby. I knew it was a familiar song to her, after all. Alexander said their mother sung that for them when they were little. Why the hell would you tell him you're making a room for him? I seriously doubt Stephanie or my dad will let him sleep over. It'll just disappoint him. Sarah sighed and plopped down on my bed, looking around my room curiously and noting that despite the fact that I had unpacked everything, the room still looked bare. I told him that because I want him to get used to the idea that there's another house out there for him to call home. "He's always welcome, and so are you," she said at long last. I stared at her for a moment. "I really appreciate that, miss, but," she interrupted me, "I know you want to get away from here, Brittany. We just need to figure out how you can take Andy with you when you leave. There has to be a way to convince a judge that you should be his legal guardian, not that shitty stepmom or your dad who's never around." "Sarah?" Sarah, I said, feeling moved. Are you saying that if we find a way? I couldn't utter the words, my throat closing up. Did she really just say that me and Hay were welcome to live with them? At the Clitton house? I talked about it with Alexander Brittany. It was sort of his idea, actually. The house is big enough, even with Dennis moving in, and you'd hardly cost a thing anyway. It's just the legal aspect. He's looking into it with Dennis as we speak, probably. Suddenly, I was bawling my eyes out, glad that Sarah didn't hesitate to pull me into a tight embrace. That's so nice of you, all of you. I hiccuped through my tears. Sarah was patting my back as I cried. It's what best friends and lovers are for, hun, she said. Alexander wanted me and Hay both to live at his house? I couldn't believe it. These people, even though I'd known them for such a short while, had already succeeded in making me feel so much less alone. They'd make me feel welcome and loved, and they didn't hesitate to include Andy into all of this. After a while, I pulled back and still sniffling. I smiled at Sarah. Now, what was this about Dennis moving in? I had never seen Sarah blush before, but she came damn close to it now. She looked away from me and hid her face behind a curtain of hair. Seriously, miss, I know he's cute and all, but first time he saw him, you went and stuck your tongue down his throat. Shut up! It wasn't like that, my friend exclaimed, and then she giggled. He's just so... God, I'm just so in love, Britt. The moment I laid eyes on him, I just knew. He's the one, and the best part is, he knew it too. I smiled and hugged her again before I'd met Alexander. I wouldn't have believed in love at first sight. But now, a knock on the door and then Stephanie's voice. Sarah, dear? Shouldn't you be on your way home? Your parents must be expecting you by now. Sarah cast me a look, then yelled back sweetly, Oh heavens, I didn't know it was this late already. Thank you for the reminder, Mrs. B. Baker. She stood up gracefully from the bed and gave me another hug. I'll see you tomorrow at school. Don't forget to pack another overnight bag, just in case, and your fancy clothes so I can help you prepare for the date. I promised I wouldn't forget. She was almost out the door when she spun around. Where did you learn that lullaby? Her expression was confused. B. I shrugged. Alexander sung it to me a few times. I guess I picked it up from him. Didn't realize I knew all the words until I sang it tonight. Sarah nodded. You're lucky. He never sings for me, not even when I have nightmares. I winked. You have Dennis to do that now. Night, Brittany. With that, she was out the door, dancing down the stairs, light as a feather as always. I prepared my bag and then got ready for bed. Before I turned off the light, I grabbed my phone. I had several new messages. 3 from Dennis, telling me to tell Sarah to get home because he missed her. I hadn't expected the guy to be so clingy. 1 was from Alexander, and my heart literally skipped a beat when I read it. You can sing me to sleep tomorrow if you'd like. You are always welcome at my home, both of you. And don't cover up the hiki agramokwa. How had he known I'd been singing a lullaby? Had Sarah told him already? But as I checked the time on the text messages, I saw that he'd sent it just a few minutes after Andy had fallen asleep. It was eerie. Damn, man really seemed to be able to read minds, even over such a distance. Of course that was ridiculous. Still, I didn't reply to his message, but furiously thought, You're going to pay for that hickey, Mr. Clitton. Oh, and the deal is off. If he really could read minds and he had been, then he'd know. I was sure he knew. I had a feeling he was laughing so hard right now that he'd fallen right out of his bed. I could only too vividly imagine Bob barging into his room to check if everything was all right. That image only a little distorted by the strange banging and moaning sound I heard in the background. I shivered and dispelled the image. I was really going insane, but just like last night, right before I drifted off to sleep, thinking pleasant thoughts of Alexander and me together, I felt that touch on my mind, soft and gentle as always. A caress that eased any last worries and pulled me into sleep, guiding me into pleasant dreams.